Face to face, hand to hand, film to film.
Welcome to the Film to Film podcast. My name is James Shurkin. I am joined here by my good friend Iñaki Liniero. How are you doing, Iñaki?
I'm good. It's been a while since I've been gone. We've been gone for a while, but we're back.
Yeah. I mean, I had the opportunity to travel outside the country this year, and now you have as well. So, it's fun, and now we are back to recording. And we're doing something a little different, going to the land of Taiwan, actually. But, Taiwan, Hong Kong, very close connections here. So it kind of fits in pretty neatly with some of those Hong Kong films that we will probably talk about in the future, but also some of the ones that we've already talked about. We're gonna skip past that castration chamber. We're definitely not gonna ask for a tip. And we are going to The Dragon Inn, 1967, directed by King Hu. A very important martial arts film, kind of in the canon, that came out just at the very beginning of that wave that would kind of just blow up, basically, in sort of like the Chinese diaspora scene. So, Iñaki, this is your first time viewing this film, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and what did you think?
It was good. I mean, it was it was a fairly serious movie. It had some ambitious cinematography. There were some fun set pieces and good choreography in general, and the plot was simple but still easy to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. For me at least, when I first viewed this film, when I first was getting into martial arts films in 2009, I actually didn't really care for it. I found it to be quite slow, and it didn't really have kind of the visceral action that you would get in the 70s and the 80s. Coming back to it now and knowing a bit more what to expect, I definitely can enjoy it and appreciate it considerably more. This film came out before a lot of those films came. Mm-hmm. One thing I was constantly comparing it to at the time was kind of the Japanese film, the samurai films that I had watched in that period. So things like Zatoichi, Sleepy Eyes of Death, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And the action, I think, has some interesting similarities to those ones and kind of the techniques that they use to do it. But is also... I don't know. It wasn't quite the same, and I think I kind of downgraded it as a result. But I think this is quite a good movie. So I'm excited to discuss it with you.
Yeah, no. It's interesting you point out the whole the samurai film thing, because it did remind me also of samurai films in the sense of how they fight. And I mean, I actually didn't look it up. This movie, I probably should Wikipedia the films, at least Wikipedia the films before going into the podcast. However, it did feel like like an earlier movie, it felt like something that was sort of following after the samurai films, but before full on, Hong Kong, or not Hong Kong, but like just historical kung fu movies like. Right now, I'm thinking of the Cripple Avengers, but I know there are more famous ones to talk about. But still, like, it was
pre Bruce Lee,
exactly pre Bruce Lee, pre Jackie Chan, those guys who did the the Cripple Avengers, who I forget their names, but like those actors, pre that, but so I do think, and correct me if I'm wrong. I do. Does it feel like it is sort of mimicking a little bit of the samurai films, like plot type of samurai, as well as maybe the pace?
I think absolutely. I think that is definitely probably the influence to look at here. Mm-hmm. I listened to a couple podcasts and did a bit of research, and I think kind of our Western-centric eyes on this might have a more natural inclination to compare it to Westerns or spaghetti Westerns. but which I think there's that connection there, and of course that's their connection between spaghetti westerns and westerns to the samurai film as well. So I think all of those are kind of like cousins in a way, but I do think because this is Asia, Japanese films were tremendously popular in Hong Kong and Taiwan at the time, that probably samurai films and like the Zatoichi, Yojimbo, those sorts of films were probably, I think, a much larger influence on this.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the interesting things watching a lot of these like late 60s, early 70s martial arts films, before martial arts films could kind of become their own thing, is to see some of the like influence and sort of the choreography and the way that things are staged. It's definitely very Chinese, but there's also definitely some elements that are taken in how they are framing and filming these things from the Japanese Chempara and samurai films.
Well, yeah, even plot wise, I mean, I think the type of plot and how it progresses, it does remind me a little bit of some samurai films. I mean, I forget the name of the guy now. Xiao, I think was his name, or the
main guy.
The main guy. The main guy was basically a Ronin. So was the innkeeper. I mean, if we were to talk about the parallels, right? The main guy and the innkeeper are two Ronins. They're samurais without masters. Then you have whoever was the old master technically was killed, and then you have this evil master. Or I forget the name of that. I was using samurai films, but like the boss, the top boss. You got this evil top boss with his team of samurais, and in that sense, to me, the plot felt more closer to a samurai film than other Hong Kong films we've watched together. Whether again the Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, those kind of films. So plot-wise, definitely reminds me more of a Hong Kong film.
Oh yeah, a Japanese film.
Sorry, Japanese samurai film.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I agree, and I think the other thing that also stands out too, that makes it a little bit unique too, is that it has more of that ensemble cast, and so there's not necessarily like we talk about the main guy, but he's like the main guy in like probably 3 or 4 of them. That he's maybe just like has 10% more screen time than a couple of the other heroes in this film, and so. If we think about the samurai films that came out at the time, a lot of them were kind of those ensemble ones. Of course, you have Yojimbo, which is kind of the counterpoint to that. But you also have things like Seven Samurai, like 13 Assassins, those sorts of like men on a mission films that were quite popular at the time and definitely sort of predate this too. Yeah, and I think as a result too, the setting and stuff like that also give it kind of this really cool, unique set to it. There's like a lot of location shooting, even though this is sort of like a one set film, that kind of give it that sort of like landscape and that expansiveness that you get from like some of the best, both westerns, obviously, certainly spaghetti westerns, but also Japanese samurai films too.
And in that sense, I that's kind of what I was in my first quick review talking about cinematography. I mean, I think. Out of this type of genre, actually, I think this is the most beautiful of the movies that I've seen. I haven't seen that many Hong Kong films. Are these Hong Kong films, or are they considered...
So this is technically Taiwanese, but, there's so much crossover going on during this time that it's not... you can think of, like, there's a lot of Hong Kong people that are watching Taiwanese films. Taiwanese people are definitely watching a ton of Hong Kong films at the time. So there's tons of crossover, talents going between the two.
Should I say then... historical kung fu?
You could call it just Chinese language. Yeah, sure. Historical kung fu. That's
because I mean later on we're gonna have with Chinese films we also have the detective films and whatever what else like other films. But okay. Anyways, this kind of like historical kung fu kind of film or whatever, or costume kung fu. Costume kung fu film. I was going to say, this is like the most beautiful out of all the kung fu, the costume kung fu films that I've seen. Granted, again, I haven't seen that many. Just a few Jackie Chan, the flying guillotines.
We watched like the Royal Warriors, which is I guess not historical kung fu, but I mean it's in the same basic martial arts genre, but comes 20 years after this. But no, I think you're actually spot on that. I think it's if you watch a lot of these, which I have seen a ton of these sort of martial arts films that are kind of period historical pieces, there is something about this film that is definitely more detail oriented and more beautiful and more thought out. I think it's important to talk about like kind of the creator behind this because he's one of kind of the godfathers of kind of the Chinese martial arts scene that would come. His name is King Hu, great name. He only directed he directed not a ton of films, but his original film was directed under the studio Shaw Brothers, which I think most people familiar with martial arts are familiar with, where they have just a ton of films. But his film, Come Drink With Me, really kicked off the genre in a really big way. But he did not really fit into the mold of working for a studio and just really cranking out film stuff. So it was pretty fast that he left the studio and he ended up working on this film. This is his follow-up to Come Drink With Me, which was a massive hit at the time. And then the Kung Fu genre from there, from 1967, from that film and One Armed Swordsman kind of just blew up and became what it is today, but also like through the 70s, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, et cetera, et cetera. Really, really pivotal person. Compared to kind of his contemporaries, like the other one he's most often compared with, Chong Che, who is probably a bigger influence on people like Tarantino. Chong Che was really known for kind of like his chopsocky, very pulpy tales of like revenge and stuff like that. A lot of blood. He had a real bloodlust for stuff. King Hu, on the other hand, this film, where'd you watch it? What streaming service did you use?
Oh, I used Criterion.
Exactly. So this guy is prestigious. He is the one that is showing up on Criterion Channel. Chong Che does not show up on the Criterion Channel. King Hu does. And his films, as he progressed throughout his career, I think he was only like 34 or 35 when he directed this film, but he went on to direct other films like A Touch of Zen, which is like a 3-hour long martial arts epic that is really very spiritual and about Buddhism and stuff like that. So he is the artistic director, whereas Chong Che directed something like 100 films in 17 or 18 years and was just cranking out a lot of them. And I love Chong Che. I think Chong Che is great. But I think it's interesting to see sort of like the two sort of trajectories here where we have, and I think this film is fun because it kind of combines like a pretty coherent plot and pretty simple plot, but it does hint at sort of like those more artistic elements and stuff like that. Like this is a film that you'd be okay showing it at a school or something like that because people's arms aren't getting chopped off and like geysers of blood and stuff like that. But it is really beautifully and meticulously framed and thought out and very well storyboarded.
By the way, I mean, a quick tangent. Star Wars is supposed to be a family series of films, and arms getting chopped off is a common theme in
Well, did they have the arm chopped off and then like the red paint just spray off of the arm?
No, of course not. It's a lightsaber, man. It cauterizes the cut right away.
Oh, that's what it is. Because if Chong Che directed it, there definitely would have been like some arms and some arterial blood spray getting over everyone's face.
Yeah, I know. No, I mean, this one actually ends with a decapitation, though.
It does. Yeah. True.
But yeah, it's not super bloody. It's actually far away from. It's actually a very pretty scene that then goes into that very abrupt ending.
Yeah. And but this is the classy martial arts. This is the classy.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with you. Super classy. And then the fighting style. This one, in comparison to the other ones, where it's a lot more just swinging and a lot. Like different types of weapons and all that stuff. Here, the focus, and this is where I kind of go back to how much of an influence samurai films are. Here, the main weapon are the swords. The way they wield them is way less swingy than in the other type of kung fu films. And here, they're very like slow, reticulated, like. Just charging and swinging last minute, almost like if they were a katana. Even though they're holding it with one arm because they're different types of swords and all that.
Yeah. So I mean, they're obviously different than like the samurai swords from the Japanese films. They're very Chinese. But yeah, no, you're definitely right. I mean, one thing that I notice immediately when watching an older one like this is that they're missing sort of like the really over exaggerated sound effects that you get of like swords clanging and stuff like that. And if I'm being honest, I do miss that just a little bit because I really do love those kind of sound effects and things like that that just hadn't been added into the genre yet at this point. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a lot of swordplay and stuff like that. And I think one other influence on kind of this, because this film really was instrumental in sort of like the fight choreography and stuff like that too, is King Hu, who, you know, like a lot of Chinese people during this time, he grew up kind of in the north of China and ended up emigrating to Hong Kong after World War II. And after his sort of fallout with the Shaw brothers, ended up in Taiwan, basically. But he's from the north, where they're Mandarin speakers and stuff like that. And one thing that the north and Beijing and is known for is kind of the Peking opera. So a lot of the poses and stuff like that of the swordsman, and it's almost very picturesque. Mm-hmm. A lot of those are supposedly taken from Peking opera and Chinese opera.
I see.
Yeah. So it's kind of really interesting just intersection of kind of like those Japanese choreography as well as like sort of that Peking opera influence.
Yeah, no, I mean it is definitely an interesting merge, especially because although it has a little bit of that Japanese style of sword fighting, they are still you still have the crazy movements. I mean, you have the wire works here. With the huge jumps, the
trampolines. The trampolines came out.
Yeah, you got the trampolines, you got the all that stuff, which that's not gonna be in a samurai film.
Eventually it made it into there, but no, not yet at that point.
Right.
Like Zatoichi isn't like jumping 10 feet.
Yeah, I mean you don't have it in your classics. Like I bet there's samurai films that do all kinds of crazy shit. But in the classic samurai films, I feel like it's generally speaking, they're pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's like choreographed in a way that maybe it's not 100% realistic, but is fairly grounded in reality.
Right. It's actually more the fights in samurai films are more suspenseful than anything else. And here you have a little bit of that too. You have more suspense of the staring off, the running towards each other, all that stuff, as opposed to the later on just crazy moves and all that stuff. But here you do have some crazy moves.
Yeah, but I think you're spot on that. So I really like that point you made, just the way that the fights are paced, where there are pauses and stuff like that in the action, which of course, as you noted, is definitely in those samurai films, also in the Western films that we think about, like Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef staring at each other and like something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I do really like how it does that here. Yeah. And I do think that's something that does get a little bit lost in some of the later martial arts films that come, where we don't have like these really tense moments between people, like these tense moments of silence and things like that. Mm. So I do really enjoy how we have that here, where it's just like a lot of people sizing each other up and trying to figure out who each other is, because this film is also kind of a spy film too in a certain way. So I do think a lot of that stuff is super well handled.
I agree. I mean, it's interesting. I'm surprised I had not watched this before.
Yeah, I felt like you and I have watched more samurai films together than perhaps Chinese martial arts, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
I mean, most of the ones you listed, I've seen with you, though.
I was trying to list ones that you would know.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, those also are the more well-known ones. But yeah, I guess perhaps we missed this. And perhaps it's also because I didn't care for it. So I was Iñaki doesn't need to see this.
That makes sense. And, I mean, but yeah, you're right. I've seen way more samurai films than like Hong Kong, or not Hong Kong, but just Chinese martial arts films. And actually, I've seen more samurai films than westerns. So like Western did not come to mind at all to me, because I rarely watch Western films.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I've definitely seen more samurais than Westerns too, so can't fault you there. Yeah, one thing that I think is, pretty notable about the film is just the title. This is a one location film for the most part, although we do get outside of it too. And it actually reminds me a little bit of sort of the Hateful Eight in a weird way.
Yeah, I agree.
Where there's like a lot of like interplay within this one set and this one sort of dingy old school inn. The dynamics are definitely a little bit different than the Tarantino film, but there's a lot of that going on. But it's also surrounded by like this really cool set outside that's sort of framed as this really arid, obviously pretty inland within China land that is like definitely not very coastal and kind of like in the middle of nowhere. Seemingly, and this sort of just way station. And Hateful Eight also has like that really cool snowy setting. And at one point, the rain is coming down really heavy. Hateful Eight, they kind of get snowed in there. So I was surprised to be reminded of that film, but that was one of the films that did come to mind rewatching this.
I completely agree. Actually, I forgot. I do have that on my notes. That's especially true when the boss, like one of the bad bosses, comes in. I forget the name of the character, but the one wearing white, and starts acting like, no, actually we're friendly. We're not here. We're not bad people. We're friendly. Yeah, you can stay in the inn. Let's have let's have,
the mid-level boss.
Yeah, that meat level boss. It's like let's have let's have a drink, all that stuff. Like right there. 1 second. Excuse me. Probably can edit that out. So right there, just it's like, okay, Samuel L. Jackson will show up at some moment,
Yeah, Walton Goggins show up, and Channing Tatum, all the familiar crew. Let's talk about it. How do you find the inn setting? And then, we'll talk about kind of the spycraft and stuff like that afterwards.
I think it's good. I think they use the space really well for the different things that happen within it. I like the fact that it's still Chinese, so you have instead of glass windows or whatever, it's like this paper windows. So you get to see whenever someone like shoots something through it, or sometimes they need to look outside and they just poke a hole. I like those little details.
Yeah.
I also think the sort of having the waiters and the manager of the inn just being very weak but very loyal to the innkeeper sort of added a good dynamic. The characters, even though they didn't really do much, they were quite memorable, especially helping out, letting people know when something was poisoned and all that stuff. It created a great environment for all these characters to sort of just live together and work together, or sort of to build off with each other's personalities.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with all of that. I also really like how it kind of like creates this sort of trapped claustrophobic setting almost in the middle of this wilderness. And like for the first half, which is almost a different movie than the second half, where it becomes more of like full-blown martial arts film, it's like a lot of it is just determining who is the good guy, who is the bad guy. People are trying to fill each other out. It's like the good guys don't know who the other good guys are. Even though the story is quite simple, we know that there's like some bad guys that want to execute some children. That's pretty naughty. And the good guys are basically trying to stop that. And they're just basically there, sort of like the Hateful Eight, coincidentally, rather than like by intention or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if there's one part of the plot that I wasn't sure, or I didn't quite get, is why within the siblings, the Shu siblings, or I forget how to pronounce it, but the one wearing yellow and the other one wearing green, blue. Why were they hiding her gender, for example? That part I didn't quite understand. But they actually, I also did, that maybe they were the ones also that I wasn't quite sure why they went to the inn, because at first I thought they went to the inn because they were chasing the folks who attacked them. But then they're like, no, we're going to stay here.
It seemed more coincidental than anything, and I don't know why she would have been traveling like that as a man, basically. Perhaps for safety reasons. It's not totally... I don't know if it's totally clear. Either that or we both missed something. But that is actually a fairly common trope in a lot of these Chinese period films. And it's not very convincing by you and my eye. I'm guessing that you could tell immediately that that was not a man.
Yeah.
But it's something where it's pretty common to see during films in this like 60s, 70s period where it's like a woman will just put on man's clothes and then people will not be able to tell.
I guess that also that perhaps that's where my Western point of view changes, because I'm like, I didn't know she was wearing men's clothes until the guy was like, oh yeah, it's my little brother, and I was like, oh.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, even for someone like me that's seen a lot of it, sometimes I'm like, oh, I get it now. It's like because I'm not used to the traditional garbs and stuff like that as much too.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that's interesting about King Hu and sort of like who he chooses to cast as well, just while we're on it too, is he did tend to be a lot someone that cast females in fairly major parts. It's interesting to think that Come Drink With Me, which I had mentioned earlier, his kind of like film that really kicked off the kung fu genre, that has a lead, Chung Pei Pei, who would she ended up starring in Crouching Tiger and stuff like that, really popular actress at the time, as sort of like the leading kicking ass martial arts star of the time. Mm-hmm. And it's really the other director, Chong Che, with his bloodthirsty nature, that really was more into the bro aspects and like had a lot of males. Oftentimes his films didn't even have a single female acting part. But King Hu, on the other hand, even though he didn't direct as many films, often had women in very pivotal roles, often fighting quite a lot. This film actually has a little bit less of that than other ones, but I think the actress here, let's see, what was her name? Pauline Ling Feng Shangquan, acquits herself quite well here as one of like the main leads.
Yeah, she does. In fact, I mean, at first, I mean. You first see her brother like earlier in the scenes, in an earlier scene where he saves the kids, and you don't get to see her, and you think, okay, this is gonna be the guy. This is because, again, I didn't know anything about this movie, so I didn't know it was an ensemble. So the first time I see it, I was like, oh, okay, this is the guy, the guy wearing yellow.
It's how they set it up. Yeah.
And then later on, it's like, no, this guy's kind of he's kind of a
idiot.
Yeah, he's kind of an idiot. And in fact, she is the leader between those two. And tactically speaking, I think she is the better fighter.
Yeah. I mean, and we get. Well, I think one of like the 2 or 3 really long extended set pieces. One of them stars mostly just her.
Yeah.
Taking on a bunch of villains, and then one of. Not the mid-level manager, but the lower-level manager of the villains. So, she really does get to kind of showcase some nice athleticism and skill in one of those fights.
Yeah, I mean, there's even one fight where it's an actual long take, one of those classic, just going from left to right, where she's just like killing people, like as the camera moves and she's moving on. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that shot especially reminds me a lot of Japanese samurai films where they're on the dolly and they're going, and I really like how it's just kind of connected on this one long take there. I think it really shows kind of just the performers doing what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to the inn real fast and talk a little bit about sort of the intrigue and the first half of it, the spycraft. So one thing that I think probably threw me off a little bit, because I came into this film expecting more of a martial arts film when I saw it back in 2009, is just the fact that, it's a little slower going. It's a lot of build up and stuff like that, and the extended set pieces don't really come. You get hints of them, but they don't really come until you get to maybe halfway through the film. Mm-hmm. How did you find that sort of first half where we have a bunch of different multiple poisonings going on? People are trying to figure out who's who. We have, what did you think of that whole first part?
So, I mean, the very first part where you get a lot of exposition and just like introducing your characters and all that stuff. To be honest, I wasn't paying. I mean, I was trying to pay attention, but like they were going very fast, and when I
Yeah.
watched it, I was very tired. So I had no idea what the fuck was going on. I just knew that there were a bunch of bad guys who, came in and took over an inn, and then they killed a bunch of soldiers that were nearby the inn. And
Thankfully, that's all you need to know, really.
And-
I mean, it's like
Right.
every time I watch the beginning, it just goes past me. Anyway, sorry.
right, no,
go
no, no,
ahead.
I know, but so at that moment when all of that had happened, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a hard movie to watch, because like just to follow, because I felt like just shit was happening, and it wasn't until Xiao comes in that I'm like that things start making sense, or more than making sense, it's like okay, now I have something to grasp on, like. Because I'm like, when is the yellow guy gonna come in? By yellow, I mean the guy wearing yellow. And then Xiao comes in, sits down, and his character is just very charismatic too. So between him being there and then the top middle boss coming in and being like, "Oh yeah, no, we're just actually police. We're from the Department of Investigation," and they have all those pleasantries. At that point, I actually started enjoying, especially enjoying the pleasantries. I actually enjoyed the whole like, both lying to each other in a fun way, and perhaps that's what hooked me to this movie. Because I mean, I'm very accustomed to watching Hong Kong movies, missing part of the exposition, and then just being lost the entire time and enjoying the martial arts only. But here there was. A plot point that actually grabbed me, and that actually was kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually real characters, and you can tell there's sort of like a chess-like dynamic going on here, where they're just trying to size each other up, and neither one is really saying what they actually are and what they think.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not one of those movies where like the characters are characterized as how badass each one is. Which is what I'm more accustomed to in this type of films. Is like, oh, I'm badass, and then this other guy comes in. It's like, oh, I'm more badass, and it's like, oh, I'm badass. I'm super muscular, and I'm like, okay,
I get it. Yeah. And this one is a little more subtle until he, eventually there are some moments that you're like, okay, this guy really can kick some ass.
But he chooses not to. So yes, he can kick a lot of ass, and you get that right away. But he chooses not to. I mean, sure, he does poison one of the guys who tried to poison him, but like he returns the weapons to all the other ones that tried to kill him, and I think he only kills one person in that entire poison scene.
Yeah. I mean, he does return the arrow, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, and that was a pretty cool scene too.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of those great little flourishes that I feel like this film is filled with. You're like, oh, that was pretty cool how they just put that whole thing together.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I'll have to mention that to Nathaniel, but I love the way that it's shot, and I think it holds up still really, really well, even though this film is, 55 years old now?
So you're telling me you cannot slap an arrow back to someone who threw it at you and then kill them?
No.
Oh shit! I completely believed it.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that doesn't totally hold up is, well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, is the depiction of asthma in this film.
As someone who actually has asthma, no. It's a very poor
To
depiction.
defeat you, I can't just run around in circles the whole time.
And like, yeah, no. That looked more like maybe like diabetes with low sugar.
Well, it is 1400s China, so, medicine is not quite what it was.
Huh. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Cool. Well, anything else to add to sort of like that first half, the spycraft stuff going on?
I mean, besides, I think it's again, besides the first like maybe 15 minutes where I had no idea what the fuck was going on, because the exposition goes so fast. I think, generally speaking, it just does a really good job as an act one, as giving you all the characters, what they do, how they are, who they are. I mean, even without that much dialogue, you know that the top middle boss is really smart. He's schemy and very smart. You know that
Yeah.
the main guy also is very smart, or not the main guy, but Xiao is very smart. You know that the guy wearing yellow is kind of a brute, and his sister is, clever and skilled and quiet. You sort of get basically all the characters, characterizations. You know that the third boss, in that ladder, he is violent and not that smart. And then all the lackeys are lackeys, and then
Yeah, you're right. I mean, all the things are established through actions and stuff like that too, and it's quite well done. I mean, I with you just kind of spelling that all out too. I do like how all the villains have slightly different approaches to it. How like kind of the middle boss is a lot more schemy, and he's trying to approach it from a different angle. I do feel like maybe some of the less thought out martial arts films will just be like, he defeated low level boss. Medium level boss is just basically a stronger version, but basically the same personality as the lower level boss, and he's going to come at you that way. But no, I think you highlighted everything really well. I do like sort of the interplay in all the scenes. The first time he tries to get poisoned, and then the second time where he needs to warn basically the brother and the sister about the imminent poisoning that's going to happen. And so he's working with sort of the inn, the owner of the inn. Yeah, the innkeeper, right, to do that too. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, what about sort of like the martial arts part of this? Were there scenes that really stood out to you as far as like set pieces coming in, any point in the film, but probably more the middle to the end?
I mean, from the beginning, it is fun how he sort of poisons the bad guy. We already mentioned the arrow, catching it and flicking it back.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite moment of the film, honestly.
Yeah, it's like, whoa. I mean, perhaps, again, the dolly shot where the main girl, I forget her name now, but when she's fighting, that is a fun sort of scene. And then of course you got the final fight, that is insane. And the final fight is the first time that you're like, okay, I am watching a Hong Kong film.
Yeah
where you have all the crazy moves coming in, and obviously they're fighting someone who's superhuman.
Yeah, I mean, he's a eunuch, so
yeah, that's
what are you gonna do? One thing that I did crack up with at the end, because we have kind of talked about the other two set pieces too, is how like they're just like taunting him too.
Yeah.
It's like the main guy's just like trying to get under his skin and be like, you wouldn't be able to enjoy it anyways.
So messed up.
Yeah. I guess those are the main ones. So did you? I think they're all pretty good. I mean, I like the dolly shot with the girl. She has a nice stand up there, standoff with sort of like one of the lower level head people. I like the use of sort of like the mini trampolines and stuff like that. You're right, that does kind of set it apart from the Japanese films of that same period. One thing that's interesting is in the research of this film, I actually found that the people think that was actually inspired by Western films where stunt people were using those trampolines and stuff like that for stunts more often, specifically in like this one Steve McQueen film that was shot in Hong Kong. And so people took note there and started using it. And it's just kind of funny because I really associate the sort of like crazy jumping and trampolines and stuff like that with Hong Kong films because like they really, really went full balls to the wall on that stuff in the 60s and the 70s. And so I thought it was kind of funny that it would come from American films and Steve McQueen of all people too.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, do you want to talk about kind of the finale where we get a little bit outside of the inn and we get to sort of that final confrontation?
Yeah, I mean, actually, before we get there, I did want to also, I guess, to bring I guess before finishing the set pieces, I did wanted to sort of like perhaps ask a little bit more about the politics that this movie sort of portrays. I mean,
Sure. Yeah, that's a good topic actually.
Because I mean, again, I probably should have Wikipedia this stuff at least done that. But if I'm not wrong, basically, the bad guy is the leader of an army of the nation. So the nation is all under one empire, but he's the leader of like some region of that army, and then there's other regions with other leaders, right? And that's why they were killing those other soldiers.
Yeah, he's a bad actor too. Like seems to act on his own and stuff. Like he executed a official too,
Right.
which is implied that he did it wrongfully. So I guess he's a government person in the Eastern Depot is what they call it, executing someone else. And so yeah, I believe that is correct. What that backdrop is.
Right. Because I thought that was kind of interesting. Because like I don't know much about Chinese history. I know that they had a bunch of they would have like empires or like dynasties, but they did have warlords within those dynasties. And sort of, it was always somewhat of what's called. It was like always a tenuous like relationship, and then the eunuchs were very very influential people in the dynasty.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics here, some of which I know and a lot of which I do not know. So I don't want to speak too much over what I do know. But yeah, I mean, this obviously takes place in sort of backwater China. If you notice, they film it very arid, in sort of like this very arid, dry location. I think it's implied it's kind of like in either the north or the northwest of China in a very dry spot. They shot this in Taiwan, which is definitely not a particularly dry spot, but the part they shot it, I think they just kind of framed it in that way. And Taiwan does have those really gorgeous rock formations that we see sort of at the beginning and the end. So I do like kind of those elements to it too. But you'll also notice throughout the film that they reference the Tartars or the Tatars. I don't actually know exactly how you say their word, but like two of the people that end up joining with them, which I think is also something interesting that you don't see in all kung fu films. It's like bad guys converting to good, basically. Those people who I guess rebelled against the eunuch because they got taken to the castration chamber. They are they were Tatars, which is an ethnic minority, and so they talked about how they always talked about coming to China and like kind of finding work and stuff like that there, and that's a group that I believe is actually kind of in the Xinjiang area, which you might know for the Uyghurs and stuff like that. So those are one of the ethnic minorities that is still around in China too.
Right.
Another thing that you'll note too about sort of the location of it is they're kind of eating an unusual diet that's a little bit different than kind of Chinese food that you and I might know. At one point they have like mutton noodles, and mutton is not like in the U.S. it's very Cantonese heavy. Mutton is something that you would have the further west, and the further north you would go in China too. So there's a lot of evidence that this is kind of like a little bit more of a backwater place. If you know what I mean.
That makes sense, and especially it almost seems like they were very very close to the borders, because the bad guy, he tells the general or the soldier general or whatever, is like, he tells him like, you should not get involved in this. This is my jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction is being at the border, and it almost makes me feel like they're basically, this is like bordering with Russia. Because I mean, I understand the Tartars are an ethnic group that lives primarily in Russia, actually.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I mean, Russia, Siberia, that kind of area, that is, probably fucking terrible, and China does sound like a lot better than being there.
Well, it's also a part of China and a part of Russia that it's probably not very appealing for anyone, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's not a part of China that you would think about, or a part of Russia that you would really think about, except in kind of a shitty way.
Yeah, exactly. What era is this supposed to be exactly? Do you know?
I read somewhere it was 1400s.
Okay.
So what dynasty that is, I'm not really sure. I'm more well versed in Japanese history than I am Chinese, to be honest. So I can't say. I think it was Ming. Did they say Ming? They may have said Ming Dynasty.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know. For me, it doesn't. Yeah, time wise, it would be the Ming Dynasty.
I guess it doesn't really matter, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Chinese history is interesting and is very vast, but you obviously don't need to know those things in order to appreciate the film.
No, not at all. But I mean, it did have a lot more historical elements than most of the other, other costume kung fu films where it's more of a bad guy, good guy. Here, it was like,
Yeah.
oh, eunuch. Like, I knew that part. Like, I knew it was like, oh, okay, eunuchs, like, emperor's eunuchs are like really important figures.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, because
So-
at first I thought, okay, this is a gang, like a very powerful gang with warlords and stuff like that, but then later I'm like, oh no, these are like official people, like these are government folks, like all these bad guys are government folks.
Yeah. Yeah, and the good guys too in some ways. Yeah. I mean, the plot listed on Wikipedia, I don't even know if I read the plot, but the Cao, the emperor's first eunuch, has successfully bested General Yu, his political opponent, and the general is beheaded. So, I mean, they are all technically government officials here too.
Right, but I mean, the innkeeper, basically, it's more of a veteran. He retired.
I assume so.
Yeah.
It'd be very weird for an active general to be acting like a innkeeper in that sort of inn.
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah.
All right, now we can go back to set pieces.
Okay, yeah. So, let's go to the finale where we finally break out of the Dragon Inn and kind of go into like this more open landscape. And for me, as someone that's traveled to Taiwan a few times, this part is fun because it seems very, very similar to the Taroko Gorge part of Taiwan on the eastern part, which is like one of those great scenic areas with like these really cool rock formations and stuff
Nice.
that happen. How'd you? And so finally, we've had a lot of build up to Cao, the eunuch here, and so we finally do get kind of the showdown here. And it's interesting because everyone knows that Cao is basically by far the most powerful of everyone. So they have to use kind of like different techniques and tactics to finally take him down.
Yeah.
How did you find kind of the last 20-25 minutes?
It was fun. I mean, they did build him up a lot. About talking about his speed, talking about his power, like how his strength. Also talking about his asthma. So I thought, okay, so probably they're gonna try to play the long game.
Yeah, still his inhaler.
Yeah. They had some sort of powder or something that they were giving him.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, so they did actually have some asthma medicine.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting dynamic because basically, if he did not have asthma, he would have been undefeatable.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of kicking everyone's ass.
Yeah, like 100%. I mean, without any weapons, he would draw blood. And like that's the first time you ever see him attacking because almost like most of the movie he's like usually being moved around, but then he actually attacks and drew some blood from our main character Xiao, and then from there you realize, oh shit, okay, this guy is magical. Like that's how powerful he is. I do love the jump cuts from one tree to another.
Yeah. I mean, Cal definitely has the best trampolines that they got. They pulled out the best trampolines they could find there to make him jump the highest.
I mean, not only jump the highest, he could teleport. Like he literally was teleporting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it literally takes all 5 of them to take him down, I believe.
Yeah, and actually, for a second I thought they all had died because there was a moment where they were fighting against him and he hit them, and it seemed like whenever he actually used his palm, he would like just give them way more damage. Like the damage level with the palm was higher than with the sword. Like with the sword, there's always like little cuts, but whenever he actually palmed someone, with like hit them with the palm, like they would just be like coughing blood and seem way more hurt. Like
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to say this is a Tarantino influence, but, you know, it's hard not to see the similarities between that. I mean, obviously, they repeated that palm stuff and sort of like that inner energy to give you that extra strength in a number of Kung Fu films. But, yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, it's a fun fight. Everyone gets to fight a little bit, which is kind of nice. Even the eunuch Tartars, they get to throw some hits. I think one of them actually is the one who actually. One of them dies.
Beheads him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them dies, and then the other one beheads him.
Yeah, which is honestly kind of shocking. You'd think that Chow or perhaps our woman protagonist would be the one to actually do the honors, but nope. It is one of like the more, I wouldn't say minor, but one of the more minor protagonists is the one that actually chops off performs the coup de grace.
Yeah, I mean, like basically these two characters came in on Act 3. You barely know of them. You just know that they're immigrants. Fucking illegal immigrants. No. But you know that they're immigrants who joined the army and then got their shit ruined by being sent to the Eastern Depot.
Eastern Depot. And then the castration chamber.
Yeah. Very different from the 36 chambers.
Yeah, that's hopefully not the 37th chamber. Certainly wouldn't want to graduate to that. I do like how at one moment, I mean, there's parts of this film that are kind of fun in that sort of chop-socky way where like they're like, can other people leave? And so they're like, okay, back off. And these guys have something to say. It's like, and then he took us to the castration chamber, and then it just cuts away.
Yeah. There's there's some humor in this movie. There's actually quite a bit of humor.
No doubt, yeah.
That one was not one of the purposeful ones.
No.
I think that's supposed to be like, oh no, he's really evil.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't know if you and I will laugh, but I don't know if everyone would laugh at that part.
I mean, to be honest, I actually did not laugh, but yeah, it could be funny.
Yeah.
But no, I was gonna say like, I do, even between the dynamics of like the good guys, and between the bad guys, there is a little bit of comedy where, more than comedy, it's I forget, I'm now forgetting which scenes I thought were comedic. I mean, one is when the bad guys are just insulting each other. I guess that's pretty fun, especially when like the second boss goes to the top boss and he's like, "Oh, we fail you," and he's like, "Change your clothes, look dirty," shit like that.
Yeah. Or when Chow is like clowning the first villains at the beginning of the film.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean the film is not. It's fun.
Yeah, it's
fun too. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that really highlights the appeal of this film. It's like it does combine kind of like the funness of martial arts films, but it's also classy. This is like fun, classy. It feels artistic in certain ways too, and I think it can satisfy people in a few different ways. And that's not something that's true for all martial arts films.
I mean, truth be told, this is a more complete movie than probably most of the, or not most, but most of the kung fu films I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, this is on the Criterion Collection. I mean, it's like if you look, I searched martial arts film on the Criterion Collection before this episode started, and they have released Police Story by Jackie Chan. Great one, classic. Definitely not very Criterion Channel like. And they've released Once Upon a Time in China, which is also kind of like this historical. It's pretty good. It's also kind of on Criterion like. And then the only other two they've done are Dragon Inn and A Touch of Zen, the other King Hu film that's really a lot about Buddhism and stuff like that. And I think that really does tell you a lot about these films. I mean, this film, well, actually, A Touch of Zen even went to Cannes and won. It didn't win the best award there, but it won some award there. So he is a director that really has been appreciated by kind of the cinema elite for a long time.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
By the snobs.
Yeah. But you know, it's not. This is not a super slow movie either.
No, I agree. No, this is. I mean, I thought this movie. I thought the pace was great. Granted, perhaps because the first 15 minutes sort of were washed. They sort of entered and left my head, and then once the actual dialogue started coming in, and and there was no more exposition from the background. I'm just really bad with exposition. I've discovered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, it's like, you know, these films are made for Chinese diaspora. That's going to be a lot more familiar with it than you and I at this point. So I agree with you. Personally, I do think the film is a little long. It's an hour and 50 minutes. I do like films that are a little bit shorter. It's hard for me to say what I would cut. Perhaps that beginning exposition, but only if I was screening it for like an audience that, you know, is not going to get a lot out of it, like you or I, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. But no, this movie is very purposeful. Actually, like, well, even speaking of artistic thing, I mean, even the title card was very different from others. You had like these handwritten title cards on.
Yeah, the calligraphy and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, even that felt more thoughtful than in other films.
Yeah, and he was known as King Hu was really known as a very meticulous storyboarder too, and I do think it really shows.
Yeah, none of this improvising bullshit.
No. And you could tell that he's probably not a director that wants to be rushed and shoot a whole film in like 2 weeks or something like that, like his Hong Kong companions were doing back in that day.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any last words before we get to Souvenir, who won, and rating?
No, I don't have much more.
All right. You got a Souvenir?
I want that umbrella.
That's a good one. To be honest, I did not think of Souvenir at all. I mean, you'd think there'd be some good stuff in this film. Yeah, umbrella is a good one. I'll just take some of the clothes that they got. They're just wearing some interesting, very historic outfits there, and I feel like knowing King Hu, they're probably very true to the time.
But which one? The blue one from the girl, the yellow one from the brother, the white one, or would you get like the hat? I mean, those like.
I'll get the hat.
Yeah.
Take the hat. There's one real cool shot too where like the hat comes off and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And you're just like, oh yeah, we got someone with a visual flair directing this stuff.
Those hats though, do they have a top part, or is it more like a visor? They almost seem like they were sort of a visor that you would tie to your head.
I think they're more of a visor, yeah.
So if you have a bald spot, you're gonna get a sunburn. It's not gonna work for me,
man. Well, you're not the one with the hat then. Yeah.
That's why I get the umbrella. Protects me from the sun.
There you go. Okay, who won the movie?
Director.
Yeah, I gotta agree. As much as I'd like to give it to the cast, which I think is generally quite excellent, it really feels like one of those director's movies. So, yeah, gotta give it to the King.
Yeah.
Who? Rating.
I put it an 8.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, actually, that is exactly where I was going to come into 8 out of 10. For me, it's not quite an all-timer. It's just a little. I don't know. It doesn't move in. It's just not my absolute favorite of the genre. It's not even my favorite from King Hu, but I can see why it's loved. I can see why it's essential, and yeah, I think it deserves its place as kind of like a classic canonical film. So definitely one that I'll probably watch a few more times before in my lifetime.
Nice.
Okay, well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Film to Film. You can email us at zafilmtofilm@gmail.com. You can hit that subscribe button. Give us a 5-star rating. If you have made it this far, you should definitely give us a 5-star rating because you've listened to the end. And you probably listened to us in the past. Follow us on YouTube too if you are interested at ZA Film to Film channel. You can also tweet at us at ZA Film to Film. Would love to hear from you. Thank you all for tuning in. We will see you all next time.
Ciao.
再见。